100 Proofs the Earth is not a Globe by William Carpenter. 1. The aeronaut can see for himself that Earth is a plane. The appearance presented to him, even at the highest elevation he has ever attained, is that of a concave surface, this being exactly what is to be expected of a surface that is truly level, since it is the nature of level surfaces to appear to rise to a level with the eye of the observer. This is ocular demonstration and proof that Earth is not a globe. 2. Whenever experiments have been tried on the surface of standing water, this surface has always been found to be level. If the Earth were a globe, the surface of all standing water would be convex. This is an experimental proof that Earth is not a globe. 3. Surveyors' operations in the construction of railroads, tunnels, or canals are conducted without the slightest allowance being made for curvature, although it is taught that this so-called allowance is absolutely necessary. This is a cutting proof that Earth is not a globe. 4. There are rivers that flow for hundreds of miles towards the level of the sea without falling more than a few feet, notably the Nile, which in 1,000 miles falls but a foot. A level expanse of this extent is quite incompatible with the idea of the Earth's convexity. It is, therefore, a reasonable proof that Earth is not a globe. 5. The lights which are exhibited in lighthouses are seen by navigators at distances at which, according to the scale of the supposed curvature given by astronomers, they ought to be many hundreds of feet, in some cases down below the line of sight. For instance, the light at Cape Hatteras is seen at such a distance, 40 miles, that according to the theory, it ought to be 900 feet higher above the level of the sea than it absolutely is, in order to be visible. This is a conclusive proof that there is no curvature on the surface of the sea, the level of the sea, ridiculous though it is to be under the necessity of proving it at all, but it is, nevertheless, a conclusive proof that the Earth is not a globe. 6. If we stand on the sands of the seashore and watch a ship approach us, we shall find that she will apparently rise to the extent of her own height, nothing more. If we stand upon an eminence, the same law operates still, and it is but the law of perspective which causes objects as they approach us to appear to increase in size until we can see them, close to us, the size they are in fact. That there is no other rise than the one spoken of is plain from the fact that no matter how high we ascend above the level of the sea, the horizon rises on and still on as we rise, so that it is always on a level with the eye, though it be 200 miles away, as seen by Mr. J. Glaisher of England from Mr. Coxwell's balloon, so that a ship 5 miles away may be imagined to be coming up the imaginary downward curve of the Earth's surface, but if we merely ascend a hill, such as Federal Hill, Baltimore, we may see 25 miles away, on a level with the eye, that is, 20 miles level distance beyond the ship, that we vainly imagine to be rounding the curve and coming up. This is a plain proof that the Earth is not a globe. 7. If we take a trip down the Chesapeake Bay in the daytime, we may see for ourselves the utter fallacy of the idea that when a vessel appears hull down, as it is called, it is because the hull is behind the water. For vessels have been seen, and may often be seen again presenting the appearance spoken of, and away, far away, beyond those vessels, and at the same moment, the level shoreline, with its accompanying complement of tall trees towering up in perspective over the heads of the hull-down ships. Since, then, the idea will not stand its ground when the facts rise up against it, and it is a piece of the popular theory, the theory is a contemptible piece of business, and we may easily wring from it a proof that the Earth is not a globe. 8. If the Earth were a globe, a small model globe would be the very best, because the truest, thing for the navigator to take to sea with him. But such a thing as that is not known. With such a toy as a guide, the mariner would wreck his ship, of a certainty. This is a proof that Earth is not a globe. 9. As mariners take to sea with them charts constructed as though the sea were a level surface, however, these charts may err as to the true form of this level surface taken as a whole, it is clear, as they find them answer their purpose tolerably well, and only tolerably well, for many ships are wrecked owing to the error of which we speak, that the surface of the sea is as it is taken to be, whether the captain of the ship supposes the earth be a globe or anything else. Thus, then, we draw from the common system of plain sailing a practical proof that earth is not a globe. 10. That the mariner's compass points north and south at the same time is a fact as indisputable as that 2 and 2 makes 4. But that this would be impossible if the thing were placed on a globe, with north and south at the center of opposite hemispheres, is a fact that does not figure in the schoolbooks, though very easily seen, and it requires no lengthy train of reasoning to bring out of it a pointed proof that the earth is not a globe. 11. As the mariner's compass points north and south at one time, and as the north to which it is attracted is that part of the earth situated where the North Star is in the zenith, it follows that there is no south point or pole, but that, while the center is north, a vast circumference must be south in its whole extent. This is a proof that the earth is not a globe. 12. As we have seen that there is really no south point or pole, but an infinity of points forming together a vast circumference, the boundary of the known world, with its battlements of icebergs, which bid defiance to man's onward course in a southerly direction, so there can be no east or west points, just as there is no yesterday and no tomorrow. In fact, as there is one point that is fixed, the north, it is impossible for any other point to be fixed likewise. East and west are, therefore, merely directions at right angles with the north and south line, and as the south point of the compass shifts round to all parts of the circular boundary, as it may be carried round the central north, so the directions east and west crossing this line, continued, form a circle at any latitude. A westerly circumnavigation, therefore, is a going round with the North Star continually on the right hand, and an easterly circumnavigation is performed only when the reverse condition of things is maintained, the North Star being on the left hand as the journey is made. These facts, taken together, form a beautiful proof that the earth is not a globe. 13. As the mariner's compass points north and south at one and the same time, and a meridian is a north and south line, it follows that meridians can be no other than straight lines. But since all meridians on a globe are semicircles, it is an incontrovertible proof that the earth is not a globe. 14. Parallels of latitude only, of all imaginary lines on the surface of the earth, are circles, which increase progressively from the northern center to the southern circumference. The mariner's course in the direction of any one of these concentric circles is his longitude, the degree of which increase to such an extent beyond the equator, going southwards, that hundreds of vessels have been wrecked because of the false idea created by the untruthfulness of the charts and the globular theory together, causing the sailor to be continually getting out of his reckoning. With a map of the earth in its true form, all difficulty is done away with, and ships may be conducted anywhere with perfect safety. This, then, is a very important practical proof that the earth is not a globe. 15. The idea that, instead of sailing horizontally round the earth, ships are taken down one side of a globe, then underneath, and are brought up on the other side to get home again, is, except as a mere dream, impossible and absurd. And since there are neither impossibilities nor absurdities in the simple matter of circumnavigation, it stands without argument, a proof that the earth is not a globe. 16. If the earth were a globe, the distance round its surface at, say, 45 degrees south latitude could not possibly be any greater than it is at the same latitude north. But since it is found by navigators to be twice the distance, to say the least of it, or double the distance it ought to be according to the globular theory, it is a proof that the earth is not a globe. 17. Human beings require a level surface on which to live, that, in its general character, shall be level. And since the omniscient Creator must have been perfectly acquainted with the requirements of his creatures, it follows that being an all-wise Creator, he has met them thoroughly. This is a theological proof that the earth is not a globe. 18. The best possessions of man are his senses, and when he uses them all, he will not be deceived in his survey of nature. It is only when some one faculty or other is neglected or abused that he is deluded. Every man in full command of his senses knows that a level surface is a flat or horizontal one, but astronomers tell us that the true level is the curved surface of a globe. They know that man requires a level surface on which to live, so they give him one in name which is not one in fact. Since this is the best that astronomers with their theoretical science can do for their fellow creatures, deceive them, it is clear that things are not as they say they are, and in short, it is a proof that earth is not a globe. 19. Every man in his senses goes the most reasonable way to work to do a thing. Now astronomers, one after another, following a leader, while they are telling us that earth is a globe, are cutting off the upper half of this supposititious globe in their books, and in this way forming the level surface on which they describe man as living and moving. Now if the earth were really a globe, this would be just the most unreasonable and suicidal mode of endeavoring to show it, so that, unless theoretical astronomers are all out of their senses together, it is clearly a proof that the earth is not a globe. 20. The common sense of man tells him, if nothing else told him, that there is an up and a down in nature, even as regards the heavens and the earth, but the theory of modern astronomers necessitates the conclusion that there is not. Therefore, the theory of the astronomers is opposed to common sense, yes, and to inspiration, and this is a common sense proof that the earth is not a globe. 21. Man's experience tells him that he is not constructed like the flies that can live and move upon the ceiling of a room with as much safety as on the floor, and since the modern theory of a planetary earth necessitates a crowd of theories to keep company with it, and one of them is that men are really bound to the earth by a force which fastens them to it, like needles round a spherical lodestone, a theory perfectly outrageous and opposed to all human experience, it follows that, unless we can trample upon common sense and ignore the teachings of experience, we have an evident proof that the earth is not a globe. 22. God's truth never requires a falsehood to help it along. Mr. Proctor, in his Lessons, says, men have been able to go round the earth in several directions. Now in this case, the word several will imply more than two, unquestionably, whereas it is utterly impossible to circumnavigate the earth in any other way than an easterly or westerly direction, and the fact is perfectly consistent and clear in its relation to earth as a plane. Now since astronomers would not be so foolish as to damage a good cause by misrepresentation, it is presumptive evidence that their cause is a bad one, and a proof that the earth is not a globe. 23. If astronomical works be searched through and through, there will not be found a single instance of a bold, unhesitating, or manly statement respecting a proof of the earth's rotundity. Proctor speaks of proofs which serve to show that the earth is not flat, and says that man finds reason to think that the earth is not flat, and speaks of certain matters being explained by supposing that the earth is a globe, and says that people have assured themselves that it is a globe. But he says also that there is a most complete proof that the earth is a globe, just as though anything in the world could possibly be wanted but a proof that proves and settles the whole question. This, however, all the money in the United States Treasury would not buy, and, unless the astronomers are all so rich that they don't want the cash, it is a sterling proof that the earth is not a globe. 24. When a man speaks of a most complete thing amongst several other things which claim to be what that thing is, it is evident that they must fall short of something which the most complete thing possesses. And when it is known that the most complete thing is an entire failure, it is plain that the others, all and sundry, are worthless. Proctor's most complete proof that the earth is a globe lies in what he calls the fact that distances from place to place agree with calculation. But since the distance round the earth at 45 degrees south of the equator is twice the distance it would be on a globe, it follows that what the greatest astronomer of the age calls a fact is not a fact, that his most complete proof is a most complete failure, and that he might as well have told us at once that he has no proof to give us at all. Now, since if the earth be a globe there would necessarily be piles of proofs of it all around us, it follows that when astronomers, with all of their ingenuity, are utterly unable to point one out, to say nothing about picking one up, that they give us a proof that earth is not a globe. 25. The surveyor's plans in relation to the laying of the first Atlantic telegraph cable showed that in 1,665 miles, from Valentia, Ireland to St. John's, Newfoundland, the surface of the Atlantic Ocean is a level surface, not the astronomer's level either. The authoritative drawings published at the time are a standing evidence of the fact and form a practical proof that earth is not a globe. 26. If the earth were a globe, it would, if we take Valentia to be the place of departure, curvate downwards in the 1,665 miles across the Atlantic to Newfoundland, according to the astronomer's own tables, more than 300 miles. But as the surface of the Atlantic does not do so, the fact of its levelness having been clearly demonstrated by telegraph cable surveyors, it follows that we have a grand proof that earth is not a globe. 27. Astronomers, in their consideration of the supposed curvature of the earth, have carefully avoided the taking of the view of the question which, if anything were needed to do so, would show its utter absurdity. It is this: if, instead of taking our ideal point of the departure to be at Valentia, we consider ourselves at St. John's, the 1,665 miles of water between us and Valentia would just as well curvate downwards as it did in the other case. Now, since the direction in which the earth is said to curvate is interchangeable, depending indeed upon the position occupied by a man upon its surface, the thing is utterly absurd, and it follows that the theory is an outrage, and that the earth does not curvate at all, an evident proof that the earth is not a globe. 28. Astronomers are in the habit of considering 2 points on the earth's surface, without, it seems, any limit as to the distance that lies between them, as being on a level, and the intervening section, even though it be an ocean, as a vast hill of water. The Atlantic Ocean, in taking this view of the matter, would form a hill of water more than 100 miles high. The idea is simply monstrous, and could only be entertained by scientists whose whole business is made up of materials of the same description, and it certainly requires no argument to deduce from such science as this a satisfactory proof that the earth is not a globe. 29. If the earth were a globe, it would unquestionably have the same general characteristics, no matter its size, as a small globe that may be stood upon a table. As the small globe has top, bottom, and sides, so must also the large one, no matter how large it be. But as the earth, which is supposed to be a large globe, has no sides or bottom, as the small globe has, the conclusion is irresistible that it is a proof that the earth is not a globe. 30. If the earth were a globe, an observer who should ascend above its surface would have to look downwards at the horizon, if it be possible to conceive of a horizon at all under such circumstances, even as astronomical diagrams indicate, at angles varying from 10 to nearly 50 degrees below the horizontal line of sight. It is just as absurd as it would be to be taught that when we look at a man full in the face we are looking down at his feet. But as no observer in the clouds, or upon any eminence of the earth, has ever had to do so, it follows that the diagrams spoken of are imaginary and false, that the theory which requires such things to prop it up is equally airy and untrue, and that we have a substantial proof that the earth is not a globe. 31. If the earth were a globe, it would certainly have to be as large as it is said to be, 25,000 miles in circumference. Now the thing which is called a proof of the earth's roundness, and which is presented to children at school, is that if we stand on the seashore, we may see the ships as they approach us absolutely coming up, and that, as we are able to see the highest parts of these ships first, it is because the lower parts are behind the Earth's curve. Now, since if this were the case, that is, if the lower parts of these ships were behind a hill of water at all, the size of the Earth, indicated by such a curve as this, would be so small that it would only be big enough to hold the people of a parish, if they could all get round it, instead of the nations of the world. It follows that the idea is preposterous, that the appearance is due to another, and to some reasonable cause, and that, instead of being a proof of the globular form of the Earth, it is a proof that the Earth is not a globe. 32. It is often said that if the Earth were flat, we could see all over it. This is the result of ignorance. If we stand on the level surface of a plain or a prairie, and take notice, we shall find that the horizon is formed at about 3 miles all around us. That is, the ground appears to rise up until, at that distance, it seems on a level with the eye line, or line of sight. Consequently, objects no higher than we stand, say 6 feet, and which are at that distance, 3 miles, have reached the vanishing point, and are beyond the sphere of our unaided vision. This is the reason why the hull of a ship disappears, in going away from us, before the sails, and, instead of there being about it the faintest shadow of evidence of the Earth's rotundity, it is a clear proof that Earth is not a globe. 33. If the Earth were a globe, people, except those on the top, would certainly have to be fastened to its surface by some means or other, whether by the attraction of astronomers or by some other undiscovered and undiscoverable process. But as we know that we simply walk on its surface without any other aid than that which is necessary for locomotion on a plane, it follows that we have herein a conclusive proof that Earth is not a globe. 34. If the Earth were a globe, there certainly would be, if we could imagine the thing to be peopled all around, antipodes, people who, says the dictionary, living exactly on the opposite side of the globe to ourselves, have their feet opposite to ours, people who are hanging heads downwards whilst we are standing heads up. But since the theory allows us to travel to those parts of the Earth where the people are said to be heads downwards, and still to fancy ourselves to be heads upwards, and our friends whom we have left behind us to be heads downwards, it follows that the whole thing is a myth, a dream, a delusion, and a snare, and instead of there being any evidence at all in this direction to substantiate the popular theory, it is a plain proof that the Earth is not a globe. 35. If we examine a true picture of the distant horizon, or the thing itself, we shall find that it coincides exactly with a perfectly straight and level line. Now, since there could be nothing of the kind on a globe, and we find it to be the case all over the Earth, it is a proof that the Earth is not a globe. 36. If we take a journey down the Chesapeake Bay by night, we shall see the light exhibited at Sharp's Island for an hour before the steamer gets to it. We may take up a position on the deck so that the rail of the vessel's side will be in line with the light, and in the line of sight, and we shall find that in the whole journey the light will not vary in the slightest degree in its apparent elevation. But, say that a distance of 13 miles has been traversed, the astronomer's theory of curvature demands a difference, one way or the other, in the apparent elevation of the light of 112 feet 8 inches. Since, however, there is not a difference of 112 hairs' breadths, we have a plain proof that the water of the Chesapeake Bay is not curved, which is a proof that the Earth is not a globe. 37. If the Earth were a globe, there would, very likely, be, for nobody knows, 6 months' day and 6 months' night at the Arctic and Antarctic regions, as astronomers dare to assert there is, for their theory demands it. But as this fact, the 6 months' day and 6 months' night, is nowhere found but in the Arctic regions, it agrees perfectly with everything else that we know about the Earth as a plane, and whilst it overthrows the accepted theory, it furnishes a striking proof that the Earth is not a globe. 38. When the sun crosses the equator in March, and begins to circle round the heavens in north latitude, the inhabitants of high northern latitudes see him skimming round their horizon and forming the break of their long day in a horizontal course, not disappearing again for 6 months, as he rises higher and higher in the heavens, whilst he makes his 24-hour circle until June, when he begins to descend and goes on until he disappears beyond the horizon in September. Thus, in the northern regions, they have that which the travellers call the midnight sun, as he sees that luminary at a time when in his more southern latitude it is always midnight. If, then, for 1/2 of the year we may see for ourselves the sun making horizontal circles round the heavens, it is presumptive evidence that for the other half-year he is doing the same, although beyond the boundary of our vision. This being a proof that earth is a plane, is therefore a proof that the earth is not a globe. 39. We have an abundance of evidence that the sun moves daily round and over the earth in circles concentric with the northern region, over which hangs the North Star. But since the theory of the earth being a globe is necessarily connected with the theory of its motion round the sun in a yearly orbit, it falls to the ground when we bring forward the evidence of which we speak, and in doing so forms a proof that the earth is not a globe. 40. The Suez Canal, which joins the Red Sea with the Mediterranean, is about 100 miles long. It forms a straight and level surface of water from one end to the other, and no allowance for any supposed curvature was made in its construction. It is a clear proof that the earth is not a globe. 41. When astronomers assert that it is necessary to make allowance for curvature in canal construction, it is, of course, in order that in their idea a level cutting may be had for the water. How flagrantly, then, do they contradict themselves when they say that the curved surface of earth is a true level? What more can they want for a canal than a true level? Since they contradict themselves in such an elementary point as this, it is an evidence that the whole thing is a delusion, and we have a proof that the earth is not a globe. 42. It is certain that the theory of the earth's rotundity and that of its mobility must stand or fall together. A proof, then, of its immobility is virtually a proof of its non-rotundity. Now, that the earth does not move, either on an axis or in an orbit round the sun, or anything else, is easily proven. If the earth went through space at the rate of 1100 miles in a minute of time, as astronomers teach us, in a particular direction, there would unquestionably be a difference in the result of firing off a projectile in that direction and in a direction the opposite of that one. But as, in fact, there is not the slightest difference in any such case, it is clear that any alleged motion of the earth is disproved, and that, therefore, we have a proof that the earth is not a globe. 43. The circumstances which attend bodies which are caused merely to fall from a great height prove nothing as to the motion or stability of the earth, since the object, if it be on a thing that is in motion, will participate in that motion. But if an object be thrown upwards from a body at rest, and again from a body in motion, the circumstances attending its descent will be very different. In the former case, it will fall, if thrown vertically upwards, at the place from whence it was projected. In the latter case, it will fall behind. The moving body from which it is thrown will leave it in the rear. Now fix a gun, muzzle upwards, accurately in the ground, fire off a projectile, and it will fall by the gun. If the earth traveled 1100 miles a minute, the projectile would fall behind the gun, in the opposite direction to that of the supposed motion. Since then this is not the case, in fact, the earth's fancied motion is negatived, and we have a proof that the earth is not a globe. 44. It is in evidence that if a projectile be fired from a rapidly moving body in an opposite direction to that in which the body is going, it will fall short of the distance at which it would reach the ground if fired in the direction of motion. Now, since the earth is said to move at the rate of 19 miles in a second of time, from west to east, it would make all the difference imaginable if the gun were fired in an opposite direction. But, as in practice, there is not the slightest difference whichever way the thing may be done. We have a forcible overthrow of all fancies relative to the motion of the earth, and a striking proof that the earth is not a globe. 45. The Astronomer Royal of England, George B. Airy, in his celebrated work on astronomy, the Ipswich Lectures, says, "Jupiter is a large planet that turns on his axis. And why do not we turn? Of course, the common sense reply is, because the Earth is not a planet. When, therefore, an astronomer royal puts words in our mouth, wherewith we may overthrow the supposed planetary nature of the Earth, we have not far to go to pick up a proof that Earth is not a globe. 46. It has been shown that an easterly or westerly motion is necessarily a circular course round the central north. The only north point, or center of motion of the heavenly bodies known to man, is that formed by the North Star, which is over the central portion of the outstretched earth. When, therefore, astronomers tell us of a planet taking a westerly course round the sun, the thing is as meaningless to them as it is to us, unless they make the sun the northern center of motion, which they cannot do. Since, then, the motion which they tell us the planets have is, on the face of it, absurd, and since, as a matter of fact, the earth can have no absurd motion at all, it is clear that it cannot be what astronomers say it is, a planet. And if not a planet, it is a proof that Earth is not a globe. 47. In consequence of the fact being so plainly seen by everyone who visits the seashore, that the line of the horizon is a perfectly straight line, it becomes impossible for astronomers, when they attempt to convey, pictorially, an idea of the earth's convexity, to do so with even a shadow of consistency, for they dare not represent the horizon as a curved line, so well known is it that it is a straight one. The greatest astronomer of the age, in page 15 of his Lessons, gives an illustration of a ship sailing away, as though she were rounding the top of a great hill of water, and there, of a truth, is the straight and level line of the horizon, clear along the top of the hill, from one side of the picture to the other. Now, if this picture were true in all its parts, and it is outrageously false in several, it would show that Earth is a cylinder, for the hill shown is simply up one side of the level horizontal line, and we are led to suppose down the other. Since, then, we have such high authority as Professor Richard A. Proctor that the Earth is a cylinder, it is certainly a proof that the Earth is not a globe. 48. In Mr. Proctor's Lessons in Astronomy, page 15, a ship is represented as sailing away from the observer, and it is given in 5 positions or distances away on its journey. Now, in its first position, its mast appears above the horizon, and consequently higher than the observer's line of vision. But in its second and third positions, representing the ship as further and further away, it is drawn higher and still higher up above the line of the horizon. Now, it is utterly impossible for a ship to sail away from an observer under the conditions indicated, and to appear as given in the picture. Consequently, the picture is a misrepresentation, a fraud, and a disgrace. A ship starting to sail away from an observer with her masts above his line of sight would appear, indisputably, to go down and still lower down towards the horizon line, and could not possibly appear, to anyone with his vision undistorted, as going in any other direction, curved or straight. Since, then, the design of the astronomer-artist is to show the earth to be a globe, and the points in the picture which would only prove the earth to be cylindrical, if true, are not true, it follows that the astronomer-artist fails to prove pictorially either that the earth is a globe or a cylinder, and that we have, therefore, a reasonable proof that the earth is not a globe. 49. It's a well-known fact that clouds are continually seen moving in all manner of directions, yes, and frequently in different directions at the same time, from west to east being as frequent a direction as any other. Now, if the earth were a globe, revolving through space from west to east at the rate of 19 miles in a second, the clouds appearing to us to move towards the east would have to move quicker than 19 miles in a second to be thus seen, whilst those which appear to be moving in the opposite direction would have no necessity to be moving at all, since the motion of the earth would be more than sufficient to cause the appearance. But it only takes a little common sense to show us that it is the clouds that move just as they appear to do, and that therefore the earth is motionless. We have then a proof that the earth is not a globe. 50. We read in the inspired book, or collection of books, called the Bible, nothing at all about the earth being a globe or a planet, from beginning to end, but hundreds of allusions there are in its pages which could not be made if the earth were a globe, and which are therefore said by the astronomer to be absurd and contrary to what he knows to be true. This is the groundwork of modern infidelity. But since every one of many, many allusions to the earth and the heavenly bodies in the Scriptures can be demonstrated to be absolutely true to nature, and we read of the earth being stretched out above the waters, as standing in the water and out of the water, of its being established, that it cannot be moved, we have a store from which to take all the proofs we need, but we will just put down one proof, the scriptural proof, that the earth is not a globe. 51. A standing order exists in the English Houses of Parliament that in the cutting of canals, the datum line employed shall be a horizontal line which shall be the same throughout the whole length of the work. Now if the earth were a globe, this order could not be carried out, but it is carried out. Therefore, it is a proof that the earth is not a globe. 52. It is a well-known and indisputable fact that there are a far greater accumulation of ice south of the equator than is to be found at an equal latitude north, and it is said that at Kerguelen, 50 degrees south, 18 kinds of plants exist, whilst in Iceland, 15 degrees nearer the northern center, there are 870 species, and indeed all the facts in the case show that the sun's power is less intense at places in the southern region than it is in corresponding latitudes north. Now, on the Newtonian hypothesis, all this is inexplicable, whilst it is strictly in accordance with the facts brought to light by the carrying out of the principles involved in the zetetic philosophy of parallax. This is a proof that the earth is not a globe. 53. Every year the sun is as long south of the equator as he is north, and if the earth were not stretched out as it is, in fact, but turned under, as the Newtonian theory suggests, it would certainly get as intensive a share of the sun's rays south as north. But the southern region, being in consequence of the fact stated, far more extensive than the region north, the sun, having to complete his journey round every 24 hours, travels quicker as he goes further south, from September to December, and his influence has less time in which to accumulate at any given point. Since, then, the facts could not be as they are if the earth were a globe, it is a proof that the earth is not a globe. 54. The aeronaut is able to start in his balloon and remain for hours in the air at an elevation of several miles, and come down again in the same country or parish from which he ascended. Now, unless the earth dragged the balloon along with it in its 19 miles a second motion, it must be left far behind in space. But since balloons have never been known thus to be left, it is a proof that the earth does not move, and therefore a proof that the earth is not a globe. 55. The Newtonian theory of astronomy requires that the moon borrow her light from the sun. Now, since the sun's rays are hot, and the moon's light sends with it no heat at all, it follows that the sun and moon are two great lights, as we somewhere read, that the Newtonian theory is a mistake, and that therefore we have a proof that the earth is not a globe. 56. The sun and moon may often be seen high in the heavens at the same time, the sun rising in the east and the moon setting in the west, the sun's light positively putting the moon's light out by sheer contrast. If the accepted Newtonian theory were correct, and the moon had her light from the sun, she ought to be getting more of it when face to face with that luminary. If it were possible for a sphere to act as a reflector all over its face. But as the moon's light pales before the rising sun, it is a proof that the theory fails, and this gives us a proof that the earth is not a globe. 57. The Newtonian hypothesis involves the necessity of the sun, in the case of a lunar eclipse, being on the opposite side of a globular earth to cast its shadow on the moon. But since eclipses of the moon have taken place with both the sun and the moon above the horizon, it follows that it cannot be the shadow of the earth that eclipses the moon, that the theory is a blunder, and that it is nothing less than a proof that the earth is not a globe. 58. Astronomers have never agreed amongst themselves about a rotating moon revolving round a rotating and revolving earth. This earth, moon, planets, and their satellites, all at the same time dashing through space around the rotating and revolving sun towards the constellation Hercules at the rate of 4 millions of miles a day. And they never will. Agreement is impossible. With the earth, a plane and without motion, the whole thing is clear, and if a straw will show which way the wind blows, This may be taken as a pretty strong proof that the Earth is not a globe. 59. Mr. Proctor says, "The sun is so far off that even moving from one side of the earth to the other does not cause him to be seen in a different direction. At least the difference is too small to be measured." Now, since we know that north of the equator, say 45 degrees, we see the sun at midday to the south, and that at the same distance south of the equator we see the sun at midday to the north, our very shadows on the ground cry aloud against the delusion of the day and give us a proof that Earth is not a globe. 60. There is no problem more important to the astronomer than that of the sun's distance from the earth. Every change in the estimate changes everything. Now, since modern astronomers in their estimates of this distance have gone all the way along the line of figures from 3 millions of miles to 104 millions today, the distance being something over 91 million miles, it matters not how much, for not many years ago Mr. Hind gave the distance, accurately, as 95,370,000. It follows that they don't know, and that it is foolish for anyone to expect that they ever will know the sun's distance. And since all this speculation and absurdity is caused by the primary assumption that Earth is a wandering heavenly body, and is all swept away by a knowledge of the fact that Earth is a plane, it is a clear proof that the Earth is not a globe. 61. It is plain that a theory of measurement without a measuring rod is like a ship without a rudder, that a measure that is not fixed, not likely to be fixed, and never has been fixed, forms no measuring rod at all, and that as modern theoretical astronomy depends upon the sun's distance from Earth as its measuring rod, and the distance is not known, it is a system of measurements without a measuring rod, a ship without a rudder. Now, since it is not difficult to foresee the dashing of this thing upon the rock on which zetetic astronomy is founded, it is a proof that Earth is not a globe. 62. It is commonly asserted that the Earth must be a globe because people have sailed around it. Now, since this implies that we can sail round nothing unless it be a globe, and the fact is well known that we can sail around the Earth as a plane, the assertion is ridiculous, and we have another proof that Earth is not a globe. 63. It is a fact not so well known as it ought to be that when a ship, in sailing away from us, has reached the point at which her hull is lost to our unaided vision, a good telescope will restore to our view this portion of the vessel. Now, since telescopes are not made to enable people to see through a hill of water, it is clear that the hulls of ships are not behind a hill of water when they can be seen through a telescope, though lost to our unaided vision. This is a proof that the Earth is not a globe. 64. Mr. Glaisher, in speaking of his balloon ascent, says, "The horizon always appeared on a level with the car." Now, since we may search amongst the laws of optics in vain for any principle that would cause the surface of a globe to turn its face upwards instead of downwards, it is a clear proof that the Earth is not a globe. 65. The Reverend D. Olmsted, in describing a diagram which is supposed to represent the Earth as a globe, with a figure of a man sticking out on each side and one hanging head downwards, says, "We should dwell on this point until it appears to us as truly up, in the direction given to these figures, as it does with regard to a figure which he has placed on the top." Now, a system of philosophy which requires us to do something which is really the going out of our minds, by dwelling on an absurdity until we think it is a fact, cannot be a system based on God's truth, which never requires anything of the kind. Since, then, the popular theoretical astronomy of the day requires this, it is evident that it is the wrong thing, and that this conclusion furnishes us with a proof that the Earth is not a globe. 66. It is often said that the predictions of eclipses prove astronomers to be right in their theories, but it is not seen that this proves too much. It is well known that Ptolemy predicted eclipses for 600 years on the basis of a plane Earth, with as much accuracy as they are predicted by modern observers. If, then, the predictions prove the truth of the particular theories current at the time, they just as well prove one side of the question as the other, and enable us to lay claim to a proof that the Earth is not a globe. 67. 700 miles is said to be the length of the Great Canal in China. Certain it is that when this canal was formed, no allowance was made for the curvature, yet the canal is a fact without it. This is a Chinese proof that the earth is not a globe. 68. Mr. J. N. Lockyer says, because the sun seems to rise in the east and set in the west, the earth really spins in the opposite direction, that is, from west to east. Now this is no better than though we were to say, because a man seems to be coming up in the street really goes down to the man. And since true science would contain no such nonsense as this, it follows that the so-called science of theoretical astronomy is not true, and therefore we have a proof that the earth is not a globe. 69. Mr. Lockyer says, the appearances connected with the rising and setting of the sun and stars may be due either to our earth being at rest and the sun and stars traveling round it, or the earth itself turning round while the sun and stars are at rest. Now since true science does not allow of any such beggarly alternatives as these, it is plain that modern theoretical astronomy is not true science, and that its leading dogma is a fallacy. We have, then, a plain proof that the earth is not a globe. 70. Mr. Lockyer, in describing his picture of the supposed proof of the earth's rotundity by means of ships rounding a hill of water, uses these words: diagram showing how, when we suppose the earth is round, we explain how it is that ships at sea appear as they do. This is utterly unworthy of the name of science. A science that begins by supposing and ends by explaining the supposition is from beginning to end a mere farce. The men who can do nothing better than amuse themselves in this way must be denounced as dreamers only, and their leading dogma a delusion. This is a proof that earth is not a globe. 71. The astronomer's theory of a globular earth necessitates the conclusion that if we travel south of the equator, to see the North Star is an impossibility. Yet it is well known this star has been seen by navigators when they have been more than 20 degrees south of the equator. This fact, like hundreds of other facts, puts the theory to shame, and gives us a proof that the earth is not a globe. 72. Astronomers tell us that in consequence of the earth's rotundity, the perpendicular walls of buildings are nowhere parallel, and that even the walls of houses on opposite sides of a street are not strictly so. But since all observation fails to find any evidence of this want of parallelism which theory demands, the idea must be renounced as being absurd and in opposition to all well-known facts. This is a proof that the earth is not a globe. 73. Astronomers have made experiments with pendulums which have been suspended from the interior of high buildings, and have exulted over the idea of being able to prove the rotation of the earth on its axis by the varying direction taken by the pendulum over a prepared table underneath, asserting that the table moved round under the pendulum, instead of the pendulum shifting and oscillating in different directions over the table. But since it has been found that, as often as not, the pendulum went round the wrong way for the rotation theory, chagrin has taken the place of exultation, and we have a proof of the failure of astronomers in their efforts to substantiate their theory, and therefore a proof that Earth is not a globe. 74. As to the supposed motion of the whole solar system in space, the Astronomer Royal of England once said, "The matter is left in a most delightful state of uncertainty, and I shall be very glad if anyone can help us out of it." But since the whole Newtonian scheme is today in a most deplorable state of uncertainty, for whether the moon goes round the earth or the earth round the moon has for years been a matter of raging controversy, it follows that root and branch, the whole thing, is wrong, and all hot from the raging furnace of philosophy frenzy, we find a glowing proof that the earth is not a globe. 75. Considerably more than 1,000,000 earths would be required to make up a body like the sun, the astronomers tell us, and more than 53,000 suns would be wanted to equal the cubic contents of the star Vega. And Vega is a small star, and there are countless millions of these stars, and it takes 30 million years for the light of some of these stars to reach us at 12 million miles in a minute. And, says Mr. Proctor, I think a moderate estimate of the age of the earth would be 500 million years. Its weight, says the same individual, is 6 heptillion tons. Now, since no human being is able to comprehend these things, the giving of them to the world is an insult, an outrage. And though they have all arisen from the one assumption that Earth is a planet, instead of upholding the assumption, they drag it down by the weight of their own absurdity and leave it lying in the dust, a proof that Earth is not a globe. 76. Mr. J.R. Young, in his work on navigation, says, "Although the path of the ship is on a spherical surface, yet we may represent the length of the path by a straight line on a plane surface. And plain sailing is the rule. Now, since it is altogether impossible to represent a curved line by a straight one, and absurd to make the attempt, it follows that a straight line represents a straight line, and not a curved one. And since it is the surface of the waters of the ocean that is being considered by Mr. Young, it follows that this surface is a straight surface, and we are indebted to Mr. Young, a professor of navigation, for a proof that the Earth is not a globe." 77. "Oh, but if the Earth is a plane, we could go to the edge and tumble over," is a very common assertion. This is a conclusion that is formed too hastily, and facts overthrow it. The Earth certainly is just what man by his observation finds it to be, and what Mr. Proctor himself says it seems to be, flat. And we cannot cross the icy barrier which surrounds it. This is a complete answer to the objection, and of course a proof that the Earth is not a globe. 78. "Yes, but we can circumnavigate the south easily enough," is often said by those who don't know. The British ship Challenger recently completed the circuit of the southern region, indirectly to be sure, but she was 3 years about it, and traversed nearly 69,000 miles, a stretch long enough to have taken her 6 times round the globular hypothesis. This is a proof that Earth is not a globe. 79. The remark is common enough that we can see the circle of the Earth if we cross the ocean, and that this proves it to be round. Now, if we tie a donkey to a stake on a level common, and he eats the grass all around him, it is only a circular disk that he has to do with, not a spherical mass. Since then circular disks may be seen anywhere, as well from a balloon in the air as from the deck of a ship, or from the standpoint of the donkey, it is a proof that the surface of the Earth is a plane surface, and therefore a proof that the Earth is not a globe. 80. It is supposed in the regular course of the Newtonian theory that the Earth is in June about 190 millions of miles away from its position in December. Now, since we can, in middle north latitudes, see the North Star on looking out of a window that faces it, and out of the very same corner of the very same pane of glass in the very same window all the year round, it is proof enough for any man in his senses that we have made no motion at all. It is a proof that the Earth is not a globe. 81. Newtonian philosophers teach us that the moon goes round the Earth from west to east, but observation, man's most certain mode of gaining knowledge, shows us that the moon never ceases to move in the opposite direction, from east to west. Since then we know that nothing can possibly move in 2 opposite directions at the same time, it is a proof that the thing is a big blunder, and in short, it is a proof that the Earth is not a globe. 82. Astronomers tell us that the moon goes round the Earth in about 28 days. Well, we may see her making her journey round every day, if we make use of our eyes, and these are about the best things we have to use. The moon falls behind in her daily motion as compared with that of the sun, to the extent of 1 revolution in the time specified. But that is not making a revolution. Failing to go as fast as other bodies go in one direction does not constitute a going round in the opposite one, as the astronomers would have us believe. And since all this absurdity has been rendered necessary for no other purpose than to help other absurdities along, it is clear that the astronomers are on the wrong track, and it needs no long train of reasoning to show that we have a proof that the Earth is not a globe. 83. It has been shown that meridians are necessarily straight lines, and that it is impossible to travel round the Earth in a north or south direction, from which it follows that in the general acceptation of the word degree, the 360th part of a circle, meridians have no degrees, for no one knows anything of a meridian circle or semicircle to be thus divided. But astronomers speak of degrees of latitude in the same sense as those of longitude. This then is done by assuming that to be true which is not true. Zetetic philosophy does not involve this necessity. This proves that the basis of the philosophy is a sound one, and in short, is a proof that the earth is not a globe. 84. If we move away from an elevated object, on or over a plain or a prairie, the height of the object will apparently diminish as we do so. Now, that which is sufficient to produce this effect on a small scale is sufficient on a large one, and traveling away from an elevated object, no matter how high, over a level surface, no matter how far, will cause the appearance in question, the lowering of the object. Our modern theoretical astronomers, however, in the case of the apparent lowering of the North Star as we travel southwards, assert that it is evidence that the earth is globular. But as it is clear that an appearance which is fully accounted for on the basis of known facts cannot be permitted to figure as evidence in favor of that which is only a supposition, it follows that we rightfully order it to stand down, and make way for a proof that the earth is not a globe. 85. There are rivers which flow east, west, north, and south. That is, rivers are flowing in all directions over the earth's surface, and at the same time. Now, if the earth were a globe, some of these rivers would be flowing uphill, and others down, taking it for a fact that there really is an up and down in nature, whatever form she assumes. But since rivers do not flow uphill, and the globular theory requires that they should, it is a proof that the earth is not a globe. 86. If the earth were a globe rolling and dashing through space at the rate of 100 miles in 5 seconds of time, the waters of seas and oceans could not by any known law be kept on its surface. The assertion that they could be retained under these circumstances being an outrage upon human understanding and credulity. But as the earth, that is, the habitable world of dry land, is found to be standing out of the water and in the water of the mighty deep, whose circumferential boundary is ice, we may throw the statement back into the teeth of those who make it, and flaunt before their faces the flag of reason and common sense, inscribed with a proof that the earth is not a globe. 87. The theory of a rotating and revolving earth demands a theory to keep the water on its surface. But as the theory which is given for this purpose is as much opposed to all human experience as the one which it is intended to uphold, it is an illustration of the miserable makeshifts to which astronomers are compelled to resort, and affords a proof that the earth is not a globe. 88. If we could, after our minds had once been opened to the light of truth, conceive of a globular body on the surface of which human beings could exist, the power, no matter by what name it be called, that would hold them on, would then, necessarily, have to be so constraining and cogent that they could not live. The waters of the oceans would have to be as a solid mass, for motion would be impossible. But we not only exist, but live and move, and the water of the ocean skips and dances like a thing of life and beauty. This is a proof that the earth is not a globe. 89. It is well known that the law regulating the apparent decrease in the size of objects as we leave them in the distance, or as they leave us, is very different with luminous bodies from what it is in the case of those which are non-luminous. Sail past the light of a small lamp in a rowboat on a dark night, and it will seem to be no smaller when a mile off than it was when close to it. Proctor says, in speaking of the sun, his apparent size does not change, far off or near, and then he forgets the fact. Mr. Proctor tells us subsequently that if the traveler goes so far south that the North Star appears on the horizon, the sun should therefore look much larger, if the earth were a plane. Therefore, he argues, the path followed cannot have been the straight course, but a curved one. Now, since it is nothing but common scientific trickery to bring forward as an objection to stand in the way of a plane earth the non-appearance of a thing which has never been known to appear at all, it follows that, unless that which appears to be trickery were an accident, it was the only course open to the objector, to trick. Mr. Proctor, in a letter to the English Mechanic, for October 20th, 1871, boasts of having turned a recent convert to the Zetetic philosophy by telling him that his arguments were all very good, but that it seems as though, mark the language, the sun ought to look 9 times larger in the summer. And Mr. Proctor concludes thus: he saw, indeed, that in his faith in parallax he had written himself down an ass. Well then, trickery or no trickery on the part of the objector, the objection is a counterfeit, a fraud, no valid objection at all, and it follows that the system which does not purge itself of these things in a rotten system, and the system which its advocates, with Mr. Proctor at their head, would crush if they could find a weapon to use, the zetetic philosophy of parallax, is destined to live. This is a proof that the earth is not a globe. 90. Is water level, or is it not? Was a question once asked of an astronomer. Practically, yes. Theoretically, no, was the reply. Now, when theory does not harmonize with practice, the best thing to do is drop the theory. It is getting too late now to say so much worse for the facts. To drop the theory which supposes a curved surface to standing water is to acknowledge the facts which form the basis of zetetic philosophy, and since this will have to be done, sooner or later, it is a proof that the earth is not a globe. 91. By actual observation, says Schedler in his Book of Nature, we know that the other heavenly bodies are spherical, hence we unhesitatingly assert that the earth is so also. This is a fair sample of all astronomical reasoning. When a thing is classed amongst other things, the likeness between them must first be proven. It does not take a Schödler to tell us that heavenly bodies are spherical, but the greatest astronomer of the age will not now dare to tell us that the earth is, and attempt to prove it. Now, since no likeness has ever been proven to exist between the earth and the heavenly bodies, the classification of the earth with the heavenly bodies is premature, unscientific, false. This is a proof that earth is not a globe. 92. There is no inconsistency in supposing that the earth does move round the sun, says the Astronomer Royal of England. Certainly not, when theoretical astronomy is all supposition together. The inconsistency is in teaching the world that the thing supposed is a fact. Since then the motion of the earth is supposition only, since indeed it is necessary to suppose it at all, it is plain that it is a fiction and not a fact, and since mobility and sphericity stand or fall together, we have before us a proof that earth is not a globe. 93. We have seen that astronomers, to give us a level surface on which to live, have cut off 1/2 of the globe in certain pictures of their books. Now, astronomers having done this, 1/2 of the substance of their spherical theory is given up. Since then the theory must stand or fall in its entirety, it has really fallen when the half is gone. Nothing remains, then, but a plain earth, which is, of course, a proof that the earth is not a globe. 94. In Cornell's geography, there is an illustrated proof of the form of the earth. A curved line on which is represented a ship in 4 positions as she sails away from an observer is an arc of 72 degrees, or 1/5 of the supposed circumference of the globe, about 5,000 miles. 10 such ships as those which are given in the picture would reach the full length of the arc, making 500 miles as the length of the ship. The man in the picture, who is watching the ship as she sails away, is about 200 miles high, and the tower, from which he takes an elevated view, at least 500 miles high. These are the proportions, then, of men, towers, and ships which are necessary in order to see a ship in her different positions as she rounds the curve of the great hill of water, over which she is supposed to be sailing. For it must be remembered that this supposed proof depends upon lines and angles of vision which, if enlarged, would still retain their characteristics. Now, since ships are not built 500 miles long, with masts in proportion, and men are not quite 200 miles high, it is not what is said to be a proof of rotundity, but either an ignorant farce or a cruel piece of deception. In short, it is a proof that the earth is not a globe. 95. In Cornell's Intermediate Geography, 1881, page 12, is an illustration of the natural divisions of land and water. This illustration is so nicely drawn that it affords at once a striking proof that the earth is a plane. It is true to nature, and bears the stamp of no astronomer-artist. It is a pictorial proof that earth is not a globe. 96. If we refer to the diagram in Cornell's Geography, page 4, and notice the ship in its position the most remote from the observer, we shall find that though it is about 4,000 miles away, it is the same size as the ship that is nearest to him, distant about 700 miles. This is an illustration of the way in which astronomers ignore the laws of perspective. This course is necessary, or they would be compelled to lay bare the fallacy of their dogmas. In short, there is, in this matter, a proof that the earth is not a globe. 97. Mr. Hind, the English astronomer, says, "The simplicity with which the seasons are explained by the revolution of the earth in her orbit, and the obliquity of the ecliptic, may certainly be adduced as a strong presumptive proof of the correctness of the Newtonian theory. For on no other rational suppositions with respect to the relations of the earth and sun can these and other as well-known phenomena be accounted for. But as true philosophy has no suppositions at all, and has nothing to do with suppositions, and the phenomena spoken of are thoroughly explained by facts, the presumptive proof falls to the ground, covered with the ridicule it so richly deserves, and out of the dust of Mr. Hind's rational suppositions we see standing before us a proof that the earth is not a globe." 98. Mr. Hind speaks of the astronomer watching a star as it is carried across the telescope by the diurnal revolution of the earth. Now this is nothing but a downright absurdity. No motion of the earth could possibly carry a star across a telescope or anything else. If the star is carried across anything at all, it is the star that moves, not the thing across which it is carried. Besides, the idea that the earth, if it were a globe, could possibly move in an orbit of nearly 600 millions of miles with such exactitude that the crosshairs in a telescope fixed on its surface would appear to glide gently over a star millions of miles away, is simply monstrous. Whereas, with a fixed telescope, it matters not the distance of the stars, though we suppose them to be as far off as the astronomer supposes them to be, for as Mr. Proctor himself says, the further away they are, the less they will seem to shift. Why, in the name of common sense, should observers have to fix their telescopes on solid stone bases so that they should not move a hair's breadth if the earth on which they fix them move at the rate of 19 miles in a second? Indeed, to believe that Mr. Proctor's mass of 6,000 million tons is rolling, surging, flying, darting on through space forever, with a velocity compared with which a shot from a cannon is a very slow coach, with such unerring accuracy that a telescope fixed on granite pillars in an observatory will not enable a lynx-eyed astronomer to detect a variation in its onward motion of the thousandth part of a hair's breadth, is to conceive a miracle compared with which all the miracles on record put together would sink into utter insignificance. Captain R.J. Morrison, the late compiler of Zadkiel's Almanac, says, "We declare that this motion is all mere bosh, and that the arguments which uphold it are, when examined with an eye that seeks for truth only, mere nonsense and childish absurdity." Since, then, these absurd theories are of no use to men in their senses, and since there is no necessity for anything of the kind in zetetic philosophy, it is a strong presumptive proof, as Mr. Hind would say, that the zetetic philosophy is true, and therefore a proof that earth is not a globe. 99. Mr. Hind speaks of two great mathematicians differing only 55 yards in their estimate of the earth's diameter. Why Sir John Herschel, in his celebrated work, cuts off 480 miles of the same thing to get round numbers. This is like splitting a hair on one side of the head and shaving all the hair off the other. Oh, science! Can there be any truth in a science like this? All the exactitude in astronomy is in practical astronomy, not theoretical. Centuries of observation have made practical astronomy a noble art and science, based, as we have 1,000 times proved it to be, on a fixed earth. And we denounce this pretended exactitude on one side and the reckless indifference to figures on the other as the basest trash, and take from it a proof that the science which tolerates it is a false, instead of being an exact, science, and we have a proof that the earth is not a globe. 100. The sun, as he travels round over the surface of the earth, brings noon to all places on the successive meridians which he crosses. His journey being made in a westerly direction, places east of the sun's position have had their noon, whilst places west of the sun's position have still yet to get it. Therefore, if we travel easterly, we arrive at those parts of the earth where time is more advanced. The watch in our pocket has to be put on, or we may be said to gain time. If, on the other hand, we travel westerly, we arrive at places where it is still morning. The watch has to be put back, and it may be said that we lose time. But if we travel easterly so as to cross the 180th meridian, there is a loss there of a day, which will neutralize the gain of a whole circumnavigation, and if we travel westerly and cross the same meridian, we experience the gain of a day, which will compensate for the loss during a complete circumnavigation in that direction. The fact of losing or gaining time in sailing round the world, then, instead of being evidence of the earth's rotundity, as it is imagined to be, is in its practical exemplification an everlasting proof that the earth is not a globe.